Well, Collin Chamberlin, thanks for doing the pod.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this. It's nice to be a guest on somebody's podcast.
Yeah, it's like all the pressure goes down because you're used to being like, even right now, I'm like, oh, how's the level? Is it okay? Is it like, am
Right.
I doing everything right? And now you can just relax.
Yeah, the amount of times where halfway through an interview where I have looked down and been like, "Oh my god, is that cable not in all the way? Do you think any of this is?" And then you're like trying to still stay in the zone with your guest, but you're also like, "I have a feeling when I stop this Zoom meeting, there will be no audio." You know.
Yeah, it's a perpetual fear. And also sometimes they're like, you start and you're like, oh, the guest doesn't have headphones. But you're in like such a good flow. You're like, I'll just suck it up. And like, I'd rather have a good show than like the audio is like 15% better.
Yeah, I had like when I first started my podcast, I was like at calling in every favor to every friend, and somehow or another, like Ted Alexandros said he would do it, and I was so excited. I was such a fan of his, still such a fan, and I'm doing it in my apartment, and I'm upstairs. I've like told no one to call me. I've silenced every device. I've unplugged the microwave, and next door they're doing construction on my neighbor's apartment,
Oh,
and I'm
wow.
just like the whole time I can just hear like jackhammers and drills and stuff. And I'm like, oh God, please not. It didn't pick up too much. You could still hear some of it in the episode, but it was just like, man, of all the times you're gonna put an addition on. It's from 3 to 4 when I'm supposed to be interviewing him.
Yeah.
You know.
That's kind of the nice thing about podcasts. Like it can be kind of like, I don't know if cheap's the right word, but like just off the cuff. It can be just two
Yeah.
Zooms with like a nondescript background and it still works.
Yeah, it's especially right now.
Like I'm not
too.
taking that drinking noise. Like that's staying in. Like I'm not taking that
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. Of course, of course. We want it raw.
Yeah.
We want the real thing. Well, right now it's so nice because like everybody's expectations are so much lower. So
Yeah.
especially with Zoom interviews where I don't know, it just felt like people weren't doing a lot of like the call into a podcast as much as they just weren't that good. And now everybody's calling into every podcast, even if you live in the same city, even if you live in the same neighborhood. And it's nice because everyone's just like, they've done a million of these by now. They know sometimes there's a hiccup. They're just sort of happy to be talking, I think.
Yeah. Now a podcast that would have taken you, especially in New York, where like a travel time can be 45 minutes easy to get to a
Yeah.
pod. You got to record it, then you got a 45-minute back, as opposed to
Right.
you could bang out two in that same time.
It's amazing. I'd never want to see another guest in person. I don't know why we ever did it that way, but I hope it doesn't. I mean, it is 100% true that like we can have a similar, just as good as discussion if you were recording it right, just as good as audio. Sure, there's some hiccups, and I never have to leave.
Yeah.
Which is great.
I looked you up before we started here, and you're from Pittsburgh.
Originally from Pittsburgh, yes, born and raised in the Steel City.
I used to work for a Pittsburgh company, Rostrum Records. I don't know if you know.
Really?
Yeah, like the rap
That's
label.
pretty cool. Yeah, did you ever come through Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I went to a wedding there for a friend of mine, who Ben G. Grinberg, he founded the label, and
Nice.
it was, I think it was Squirrel Hill. Maybe that's where he
Yeah.
lived. Is that a thing? Squirrels.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
There's a
It's,
fries on a sandwich in an old hotel. That's all I remember.
that is really all you need to know about Pittsburgh. That is a city. I love it. God love that city, but that is a city that has just told everybody, listen, we're not always happy, and we put fries on a sandwich, and that's it. Like that's their claim to fame. Like you go to New York and you have to see the Empire State Building, and you go to Chicago and you want to see Navy Pier, and you go to LA, and of course there's the Hollywood sign and a million other things. In Pittsburgh, it's like, have you had our sandwich, which is potatoes and bread and meat? Have
It
you
was
had that
so
yet?
good. Oh my God.
Oh,
It
it's
was
the best.
it was worth it. And I also remember being downtown like as a Steelers game was ending and
Yeah.
like just the rush of people and like how central the stadium was to the city. And I thought that was kind of cool. Like the city definitely had its own vibe versus a lot of other Midwestern cities I've seen.
Yeah, it's such a good little city,
Yeah.
where it really does just sort of And I kind of love it because Pittsburghers they're isolated in the sense of like they really don't care about anything that's going on outside of Pittsburgh. And I love that. I love like when I go home and you're like people ask you like where have you been? It's like, oh, I was in Des Moines or Omaha or wherever, and they're like, yeah, never been. That's whether that's 40 minutes away or 5 hours, I'm not going, and they don't care. They don't care.
So you don't go back much?
I went back when I first moved to New York. I was going back often, and I then during the pandemic I went back because once things sort of like not settled down, but I went back. My girlfriend was living there at the time, and I went back and stayed with her for a little bit. And then it was also like there was nothing happening in New York, and I would just go and hang out and see friends and stuff on their porches over the summer. But I go back now. I love it. I mean, I love going back. I try to go back as much as I can, but there's also with things picking back up, it's not like we're on vacation anymore,
Oh, is that a thing? Like now it feels like New York is back and that vacation mode is over?
100%. Yeah, I'm already like anxious about clubs that are going to reopen that I'm not past at. That's like, am I gonna have to hang out there again?
Yeah.
Like, am I gonna have to stand in the bar? So that's come back in full swing.
And I was thinking about the same thing. It's like, yeah, where are you now in line of like relative to where you were before?
Yeah, exactly. I think what's a little bit relieving is that everybody is having that thought. Like I've talked to people that have been doing it less time than me, and they're in the same boat. And I've talked to people that are past at the cellar and have tonight shows, and they're like, yeah, I just don't know if I'm gonna be able to get up. I don't know what that's gonna be like. I was like, get up. I was like, you've been on the Tonight Show several times. It's like, what, you're gonna be okay. But everybody's worried about it.
Yes, there's a new anxiety. It's also like the anxiety of it's like getting out of jail. It's like you have to reacclimate to like the new life.
Yeah, absolutely. And also reacclimate to like, what is a good show? What is a bad show? We got I think at first outdoor shows were just brutal because we'd only known indoor shows. And then they got to be really well produced.
Yeah.
And now indoor shows are coming back, and you're starting to get a few more of those, which makes you not like the outdoor shows as much. So it's like we kind of have to transition back into what we were, which will be interesting.
Yeah, it's like going back in time. It's Back to the Future comedy. And
yeah.
Do you feel like, have you done any indoor shows in New York?
Yeah, I've done a few.
Does it feel weird? Like, are you vaccinated? Does it feel weird? Are you nervous or?
I'm vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated.
Oh,
I got
nice.
the Big J, the Big Johnson, and which people, by the way, if you tell them you have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they have a lot of nerve giving you their opinion on it. They're like,
right.
That's only 70% effective. I was like, which vaccine do you have? It's like, oh, I don't have it yet. I'm not going to get it. I was like, all right, well, thank you so much for your opinion. And when you're done doing my oil change, maybe you could look at my stock market portfolio too. Like, it's like so many people have so many strong opinions about like this. And I'm like, wait a second, you're not a doctor? I think I'm good.
That's been the whole pandemic. You're right. Like everyone's had an opinion, like a strong opinion on masks, on this, on that. And like every time a doctor says it, we're like, we don't believe you.
Yeah, I am somebody. People are like, "Oh, you're a follower." You're like 100% yes. I love authority. I love it. I love when someone smarter than me goes, "This is the decision you have to make." I go, "Thank you for not making me worry about having to pick something." I'm glad. I don't know if I've never seen any of my doctor's degrees. I've never checked them, but they have more confidence than I do, and that goes a long way with me. I'm a real sucker for that.
There is a saying someone said, I can't remember, I wish I could give proper attribution, but it's like if you go to a doctor and the doctor's like, yeah, this is what it is, like they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% how I feel. When I get on a plane, I'm not like, I think you should have engaged the landing gear a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah,
no
like let me Google that. Are you doing
responsibility.
your job? Yeah, let me Google your job that you went to school for.
Right, right. I mean, as comics, we hate it when people come up and are like, "Can I tell you a joke? You could use this if you want." Do
Yeah.
you think a doctor who has given all of their life and time and money, and just repaid their student loans, wants to hear what I have to say on, the vaccine? Absolutely not.
Yeah. There are comics that I really respect that are like known for being like, "Hey, you should try this line." And I think that's great. But every time I think about saying that to someone, I'm like, I can't go up to this person. I'm like, what do I like? I always talk myself out of. I'm like, they're fine.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, this better kill when I give it to them.
Yeah.
Like they better. I made the mistake once of to a friend giving them a tag on a joke, and it was one of those things where like before we became friends, I was sort of trying to not court their friendship, but you're like, oh, I'm trying to talk to people, and it's awkward stuff, and so I watched them do this joke, and I go to give them a line, and I was like, maybe there's something there with this. And then I realized later that it was like a joke that they were closing with regularly, like it was already done. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like I had no idea, like that was like one of your signature bits. I'm over here giving you like, hey, explore this angle. Like
Yeah. Have you tried?
just
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, I've
yeah. And
tried.
it's like, they've done it on like TV or whatever already. And like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hey,
That's
you
always a
could
bad
still open up
feeling.
an extra minute after, you
Yeah,
never know.
right. But anyway, on a tangent, I've done some indoor stuff. I did it before I was vaccinated. I hate to say it, but I did it before I was vaccinated. I did some clubs around, out of New York as well, and I felt safe. I mean, I
Yeah.
take the precautions that I have to take. I was getting tested before I left and after I left, and luckily never tested positive. And I also am not somebody that like even before COVID had a lot of what had a big circle of people I was seeing before and after shows.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like I was a real just do the show and go back to my apartment or go back to the hotel kind of guy, and that's the
Right.
same way I am now.
Which is today's
So
equivalent of you're probably great on Zoom. Close the laptop, you're done.
yeah, exactly. It's wonderful when I mean some of the Zoom shows you do, you're like that'll be the last one, and then you take a couple more, but there is something so nice about performing in like your sweatpants and not having to go anywhere when you're done.
Yeah, I think our whole culture has completely changed. Like, even yesterday, I was like, let me get some mouthwash. I'll go to CVS. I'll be like, support. I guess they're not even local, but I'll support the CVS near me. So I go over
Right.
there, and the mouthwash is literally twice as much for Amazon to like deliver it the next day. And I'm like, life is different now. There's no going back.
Right. I have that same feeling. My girlfriend, God bless her, is she really likes to find the best deal, and she's like, why would we spend money on that? We could do this. I'll walk to the store. I'm like, you'll walk to the store. I was like, what are you crazy? Like I am so used to just now ordering things whenever I want them. And I also love that like like going to CVS, it's like, well, it's not a small business, but it is a business.
Yeah,
It's a place with rent. It's like, we really should go to Walmart because they're probably not doing well. You
exactly.
know?
I guess
Yeah,
if
it's
things
wild.
continue the way they're going, CVS will become a small business.
Yeah, there's just gonna be like mom and pop CVS's. There's gonna be like one CVS on the street, and that'll be it.
Yeah,
And everyone will be like, "Remember the good old days when there was a dozen of those?"
yeah. And you started your podcast, Hell Gigs, during the quarantine?
Yeah, I did. I did what a lot of other comics did, where it was like you start looking at your career and what you've done, and you're like, oh, geez, pretty empty, that resume. And so I started the podcast. I guess would have been in like May or June, and we're coming up at the end of this month. It'll be the 50th episode. So
Nice.
it's been fun. It's one of those things where I forget. Someone told me like most podcasts don't make it past episode 7.
Oh,
And I was like, if I can get past episode 7, I'll feel like I've done something right. and it's probably not even true. I probably just like heard that and I was like, oh, I could definitely do 8 episodes.
Yeah.
So
You just pack it up at 8.
yeah. But yeah, I started it in the quarantine, and I think it was a great time to start it because there were so many people around available to do it
Yeah.
and had nothing else to do. And I think, especially comics, they were like really missing talking to comics.
Yes, for sure.
So it was kind of nice. Like everybody that I really wanted to talk to was available at first. So that was great.
Yeah, I think was your first episode Mark Normand?
First episode was Adam Ferreira, and then episode 8 or 6 or 7 or something was Norman, and it was just so wild. Like, I texted him and was like, "Would you want to do this?" And he's like, "I'm free, baby." He had no problem doing it. It was great.
Yeah, he's a great guest and a great dude. Yeah,
great dude. He's hilarious because I'm so nervous about like anytime I do a podcast or a virtual thing, I'm like, I gotta be home, I gotta silence everything, and he literally did the podcast on his iPhone on his stoop of his apartment. And at one point, Joe List drives by and beeps. And he's like, Joe, what's up? I'm on the phone with Collin doing a podcast. Hell Gigs. You've heard of it. And he just has no problem doing that.
Yeah, he didn't mind walking around New York with his mask on, like FaceTiming as he walked.
Right. He has no and it was great. Restrictions. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I've seen him do shows virtually for the Cellar doing that, walking around, And it's like, God, you have no worries. You have no fear.
Yeah. It's a certain kind of, it kind of it takes the pressure down. Like, I don't know. I believe in both schools. Like, if you go all out and do the backdrop and the mic and everything, like that's cool. And if you do it the other way, it's cool too. It's like, it can be whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I think that's what you said it best. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. It's make yourself the most comfortable you can be, because this situation is about to be very uncomfortable.
Exactly. Yeah,
so
that's well said.
You need to coddle yourself because the Zoom audience will not be doing it for you.
No, that's true. And I saw you got added to you joined the Helium podcast network.
Yeah, they reached out. I worked with them, the Helium
clubs
chain.
Yeah,
the clubs, and they had just reached out and said, "Hey, you want to bring your podcast to our network?" And it's just one of those things. You're like, yeah. I me't weird that I would even question it. Of course they were like, and they're great. They're nice. I've had a lot of fun with working with them, and it's one of those things where like, is there anything we could do? Do you need anything? I was like, yeah, I'm really not used to people asking me these questions,
Right.
It's like every email, I'm like, thank you so much for everything you've been doing. I hope we can continue to do this. I always think it's going to be the last time they want to work with me.
Right. It's like that support of like a manager or girlfriend. Like, are you okay? Can I get you something?
Right. You're like, what? Am I okay?
What are some of the advantages of joining the network that you've seen so far?
Oh, well, first of all, just the support of them, just to have somebody validate you is nice, and to say that we like this, we think it's worth our time, is great. That's all you want as a comic, I feel like. 2, we've also done some fun live shows. We've done a couple live podcasts from the Philly club, and they've been a blast. I never expected when I first did this to do any live podcasts, and sort of the idea was like, well, that sounds like too much work. I'll never do that.
Right.
And then they were like, do you want to do this? And they're like, all right, we're going to do this. And then you do it, and it's a blast. And now we're working on other live formats for the podcast. And they've also been great with like helping get guests that come through their clubs. It's like, hey, like I worked with, I went to Philly and did an episode with Matthew Broussard, and we did a live episode, and he was in Philly that weekend. So they were just like, would you mind coming in a day early to do the podcast with Collin? And he was like, absolutely not. And it was great. We hit it off, and he was fun. And it's like, he's in New York, I'm in New York. It's a nice connection now that we've like done that together. And that's something that I would have never had even if I was doing if I had all the steps of like, all right, I'm actually at the Helium in Philly, the podcast is my own, I'm doing a live episode, I would have never thought to like reach out and ask Matthew on my own.
Yeah.
I would have just been like, well, he's not going to do it. You know, the fact that they're able to use their arm a little bit to do that is really helpful. So
It's that manager relationship.
Really,
like you have someone else asking on your behalf the same question you could ask, but having that third party do it just takes away all the awkwardness.
yeah, yeah, and it's fun just to also, you know, be a part of something where there's other good podcasts. Like I know a couple of the other comics that have podcasts on their network, and it's like you feel like you're working on something together.
Yeah.
You know, we want the network to do well. We want each other to do well, you know, and I think that could be rare sometimes in comedy. So when it does happen genuinely, it's a nice feeling.
Yeah. There is a little bit like comedy is so weird because there's an element of like there's only this many spots in some things, and in other things like podcasts, online, there's unlimited spots.
Right. Yeah, it's wild. Like the competition is obviously there always, but it's now a thing where like if my podcast succeeds, another podcast succeeds, and because they succeed, I succeed more. Like
yeah, it's
we
reinforcing.
are sort of yes, exactly. You know, and we can do crossover things and stuff like that. So I like being with them. I was so happy when they reached out, and it's just nice to have somebody validate what you're doing.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like going to NYU. You always have that stamp. You're like, oh, NYU.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And someone cares, you know?
Yeah.
Someone you're like I was like, you were listening that whole time? I was like, I had no idea. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is funny like how people discover podcasts now can be so random. It can be like the one-to-one someone tells you method. It could be like YouTube, like algorithmic. It's just like, oh, you like this? Try this. Or it could just be completely random.
Yeah, you know, I'm sure you've had this happen to you. You get a guest that you really like, or you get a show that's really good, and you start getting the messages from other comics. Some of them are like, "Congrats, that's awesome," and then some of them are like, "What's going on here? How'd you get Mark on your podcast?" You know, that kind of thing, and it's like. So when I announced that like it was like we needed a press release. When I posted on Instagram, you know, that I was
That's
like,
the press release of now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When I was like, I'm on the podcast network, and my dad called me and asked, "What's that?"
Yeah.
You know,
you're not putting a press release in Laugh USA.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like you know, I had a couple comics reach out and be like, "What's going on here? How did this happen? Why are you?" And it's like, how did this happen? I was like, when I was in Pittsburgh, I would drive 3 hours every month, once a month, to do the open mics in Buffalo. And then I did an off night. And then I featured. And then I featured in Philly. And over 3 years, whatever it was, of working for them, trying to just like stay, be a good comic, be a good person to work with. And starting after, you know, 20 episodes, 30 episodes of starting a podcast, they reached out. So that's what I would do. If you want the answer, that's what I would do is put in all of your time to be a good comic and a good person for them, and maybe they'll reach out, you know?
Yeah. There's like, sometimes people want to use your work as a shortcut.
Yeah. They're like, would you mind giving them my number? It was like, yeah, would you mind giving them my number? Because I'm still not sure if they know it. You know, it's like...
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they could easily forget about me. They have a million things to do. Any booker, any club, any network, whatever it is just every day just hammered with emails from people. And it's so easy to slip through the cracks. It's like I'm also fighting for scraps here.
Yeah. I'll gladly share like a relationship that's like a solid relation. Like if you message me about someone I know well, I have no problem. But if it's someone like I've only met a few times or only done a show with like twice, I feel like I don't have enough of a relationship with that person to introduce you into it also, you know?
Yeah. And I'm also happy to vouch for like any comic that's like good and hardworking.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, I've had comics vouch for me. Like, you need that. But, like, you have to also understand that there's a little bit of, like, there are certain people that know how to ask. There's certain people that don't have to ask, where it's like, oh, you don't work with these people, or you haven't done this? Oh, let me see what I can do.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get you a guest spot or whatever. But then there's some people that have no tact, and they're just like, before they even say hello, they're like, do you have the number for that club in Poughkeepsie? And it's like, how are you? You know, how are you doing?
Right.
You know, it's like a little bit of polish on this would help.
Yeah.
You know?
Going back to what you were saying about guests, like, do you have guests on your podcast that you don't know? And I'm bringing that up because, like, basically every guest I've had on mine so far, it's only been someone I know.
Yeah.
And I haven't ventured out into, like, reaching out to people like I've straight up never met.
Yeah. I've had people on that I've never met. I mean, I've actually had a lot of people on that I've never met or met after I did it because of the situation we're in. You know, certainly my first dozen episodes, 20 episodes were taught where I just called all of my friends and any headliner that I had a good relationship with. I was like, would you please do this?
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry. I know you're getting this from other people, and I was lucky that, you know, for the most part, everybody said yes. And then I started just reaching out to other comics in New York that I maybe had run into once or twice. And then after that, it was like, you know, I'm just going to ask and see if they want to do it. And so as this has been going, I've probably interviewed more people that I haven't met in person than have at this point, just because I am interviewing people that I just don't live in the same city as.
Right.
You know? So.
Oh, that's great. I saw one other thing you posted on your bio, which is you did a show with Martin Short and Steve Martin.
Yes.
What was that? That sounds interesting, to say the least.
It was really the highlight of my career, and I had no lines. And when I lived in Pittsburgh, I have to give a lot of credit to my dad for which is such a strange thing to say, but when I lived in Pittsburgh, they were touring with their sort of live show that they ended up doing for Netflix, and they had two shows at a theater in Pittsburgh, and they sort of, my dad knew somebody who was casting a role for their show, and he was like, I think you and your son should submit for this because it kind of fits, like they're looking for like a stocky person who with a beard, maybe sort of like burly, and which I'm the farthest thing from burly, but I can fake it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I send in a picture of myself and he sends in a picture. And they were like, all right, you're in. You got this spot. And I still don't even know what it is. It's like you have to be at the theater at 3 o'clock for auditions. Or not auditions, for dress rehearsal. So I like show up with like my bag. I'm wearing like a winter coat. And I just stand I get there. I find out like where to stand. And so I'm out of the way. And I stood there, I'm not kidding, for 2 hours with a winter coat on, sweating. Because I was so afraid to be in anybody's way. And Martin Short and Steve Martin walk in, and they're rehearsing everything. And my part of the show was at the very end. I played this Scottish guy, and I had to come out on stage and pick up Martin Short, and he pretended he was a set of bagpipes.
Yeah.
So like, there's that, like that's the bit. And
you manhandled Martin Short.
Yeah, right. And so like, finally it comes time to rehearse, and they're like, okay, Collin. I come out and he's like, hi, Marty. I'm like, yeah, you sure are, you know? And like Steve Martin is behind us watching us, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Like I'm going to drop him and then I'll kill myself. But we do it, we rehearse, he goes, great, you're going on tonight at this time, be here at this time, and here's some tickets if you want to see the show or give them to your family, whatever. So I did the first night. My dad was supposed to do the second night. And the producer of the show goes, really sorry to say this, but Marty doesn't want to rehearse with anybody else again. He just doesn't feel like doing it. So we're going to need you to come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
They were like, we'll give your dad tickets for the show, but sorry. And I called my dad. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm
You bumped your
sorry.
dad.
This is, I just bumped you. And he was so cool. He was like, oh, that's great. It's best case scenario. He came to see it. My mom and my sister saw it as well the one night. And it was the coolest thing in the world. Like, it was the loudest I've ever heard an audience. It was the brightest I've ever seen a light. And then at the end of the weekend, or the end of the shows, of course, they're like, if you want a picture, there's definitely going to be a time for a picture. And Martin Short, like, hugs me, and he goes, I go, you don't know what this means to me. Like, you're stumbling. You don't know what to say. You just want to tell them that you're a comic, that this means a lot. And he hugs me, and he goes, Collin, you killed, and you said nothing. How wonderful is that? And it was like, that was it. That was the end of the interaction. I got to watch them the rest of the night and watch how they worked. And it was the highlight so far of my career. And as he said, I had no lines. So.
That's perfect. I mean, this must be the story you tell on your podcast when people are like, what's your hell gig? And you're like, obviously.
Yeah, you'll never believe it. I had a horrible night at the Benedum, with these two hacks. Yeah. But it was wild. It makes all of those bad shows so worth it, because you're like, this will keep me going for a year. And then when I retell the story, that's a couple weeks right there.
Right, there you go.
Like, I just got to tell it, and I'll get through mid-April. Whatever bad shows come, I'll be like, oh, that was fun.
Perfect. Was it the same like special that was on Netflix, or is it something else?
It was the same thing, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was that I think they ended up shooting in Denver. And they were rehearsing it, and it was so cool because, like, I got to see them rehearse. I got to see them workshop a bit, I got to see, after the show, Martin Short is pretending he's drunk, and he's still on, and Steve Martin is very, like everybody would expect. He's Steve Martin, They're exactly how you would expect them to be, and that was the greatest thing, just to, like, watch them work, be in their presence, and they lived up to everything you thought they were going to live up to.
That's awesome. Did you watch it on Netflix and you see the burly guy? You're like, I was way better.
Of course. I'm watching. I was like, well, I mean, he really isn't holding him as well as he should.
Like, I did more of a scoop. I was like cradling.
Yeah. It was terrifying, because as much as I was happy to do it, I wanted it to be over.
Yeah.
I really, because you have to walk out in the middle of the show. First of all, I'm dressed in a kilt, and a hat, and a like a puffy shirt, and you have to walk out in front of all these people and nail it. You have to like he's like, all right. He told me, he's like, I'm gonna like grab you, like sort of swing my arm around your shoulder, and I'm gonna jump, and you just put your arms there. I'll get into your arms. And then he puts his finger in my mouth, and I have to pretend to like use him as like bagpipes, right? But like when we first tried it, like I missed, he I didn't catch him right away, and he like sort of, and I was like, if this happens on the night, I don't know what'll happen. Like, it was almost like, is it
because it's the closer,
fail?
Right?
It was pretty close. It's like 3/4 in, and it's like the big bit before like a music break, and then they come out, and then it like so you're like, the show has been going on, and this is not the time for there to be a hiccup.
Right.
And so the second night that I did it, after I was done, there was this relief of like, I can now watch the end of the show, and just be excited about what just happened, because the first night I did not feel that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have a hell gig that you like? It's your hell gig that kind of inspired the podcast?
Oh, I have so many, I think, that inspired the podcast. I remember talking to some comics before the pandemic, and you've had this conversation too, where you're talking to comics before or after a show. And to me, the best part of that was like, when you were like, have you played this club? Oh my God, the MC there sucks, and this, and the sound. The sound guy, he messed up the cue, and the lights are bad. Like, oh, I just did this fire hall. It was horrible. Like, I love those. And I've had so many conversations with one of my best friends, is a comic, Ray Zawadney, where if he's calling me at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, I know it's because his show went bad, And it's the same for him, where it's like, there are 3 people I call after a bad show. He's usually the first one. And by the end of it, you are usually either happy or laughing or just like so relieved. And so I was like, I want to capture this because this is way better to me than like, breaking down a joke or whatever. Not that that's wrong, but it's like, I'd much rather hear about the time that you almost fought, a biker, or that I try to save some of my stuff. I try to let the guests do all the talking. But some of them have come up. Like, I had someone pull a knife on me once.
Oh, damn.
In an open mic. And I was just
an open mic?
Yeah, right. And
for your money or like over the
because
jokes?
I said something to him and his girlfriend. I was young. I was really not good at it, but I was also just like doing crowd work and they were not happy.
Yeah.
I've had, I performed like, I did a prom. I did like not even a prom, a pre-prom where this guy called me and was like, do you want to do like a private event for me and my family and my daughter and her friends? I was like, a year in. I was like, yeah, absolutely. He goes, what's your rate? I was like, I don't know, $50. And he was like, absolutely. And that's where you start to realize you have to have some value, like I should have said 1,000 because I would have either not had to do it or I would have made $1,000.
That's Quincy Jones's quote. He's like, if you don't know how much to ask for, it's the most you can say without stuttering.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like that is the best piece of advice for anybody in entertainment because I ended up with the show quotation marks heavily used was I met them at a like a botanical garden where they were taking pictures before their prom and I followed them around and told jokes while they took pictures. That's what he hired me to do.
You carrying your little PA and your mic or?
No mic, off. Acapella, acoustic, like, and the guy wanted it to be a surprise for his daughter who's in high school. So they pull up in this big black Escalade and the girls get out and they're in their gowns. There's like 6 of them and this guy gets out in a tux and the dad's in a tux and he walks up and I'm sitting outside of this place and goes, Collin, what are you doing here? Wink, wink, like and gives me like the double wink, like to start. And I'm literally just doing crowd work in front of this place. And at the end of the night, before they left, one of the moms finally goes, like, I'm like, what do I do? Do I goof around with their pictures? And one of the moms just goes, I think we've done enough. I think we've had enough. And then I had to get back on the elevator with them and leave. Like, it was the most just soul-crushing thing,
This can be your Patreon. Your Patreon can be your hell gigs.
Yeah. I try to do some of them for that. And it's just like, in the moment, you're like, I don't know if I'll survive this. And then after some time has passed, you're like, oh, this is the story I'm going to tell forever.
Yeah.
But
they're almost
so
like
many.
The really bad gigs are almost more valuable than the ones that are like, that was okay.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's like, if you have a really good gig where like you kill or if you learn something or you've made an impression on somebody, that's great. But the sort of like, we all have had these shows where it's like, it was 50-50.
Yeah.
You're way better off having a really crazy bad show because you'll get so much more out of it than being like, I didn't really try anything new. Played, they were okay.
Yeah, they're okay. I was okay. And where were we eating?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. You're way better, doing a show in a basement where no one's sitting.
Totally.
So,
what's one thing you invested in terms of your career that like really paid off? You're like, I'm going to take the time, and it doesn't need to be money. It can just be like effort to like take yourself to the next level.
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is I moved to New York.
The big move.
The big move. And it was terrifying. It was... My dad moved me in, very supportive. He drove me with, he packed his Infiniti SUV with all of my stuff, which that's a pretty sad moment when you realize all of your personal belongings fit into a mid-sized SUV.
Yeah.
When you're like, well, we don't need a moving truck because I don't have anything, Yeah,
the back seats are still folded up. You're like,
yeah, like they're like, we could pick people up if we needed to, He moved me to New York. I was a mess. I like had never lived outside of Pittsburgh, and but it was the best thing I ever did because when I got here, it just totally punches you in the face of like you better be serious about this.
Yeah.
Because now you're playing with real money. You were playing before with monopoly money, and now it's real because your rent is really high. Everything is expensive. This is a hard city to live in sometimes when it's not going well. And if you're not totally committed to this, you'll know.
Yeah,
And you
you'll
better
slip
get
and
out of
fall,
here.
and yeah, there goes rent.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that would be the first thing. And then also just like, I don't know, I just take it. I was fortunate to like meet a lot of good comics to sort of see how they handled it, and it's a business. I started taking it more seriously over the last couple of years in the sense, not that I didn't before, but like you just don't know that there's another level of
Yeah.
taking it serious. Where it's like, oh, I'm going to get a whiteboard and I'm going to put my bits on there and I'm going to organize my schedule. I'm gonna start making scheduling time to write every day, keeping a better track of my notebook. It doesn't all have to be napkins and
And notes in the phone.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's fun. That's
Yeah.
fun. But I think we romanticize it a little bit, where it's like, no, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna sit down and write a joke, and then I'm gonna put it on my computer. I'm gonna have a file, a folder with all my jokes. Every file is gonna be a name of a joke. Like, yeah, I would say the time that takes to realize that you have to invest to be like, oh, this. If I really want to see some more progress, I have to treat this like a business, and it kind of is.
Totally. I find sometimes when like I have my scheduled writing hour and I just like can't start, I'll be like, all right, well, let me like take what I have and start organizing it. And then that'll start making me want to write. If I'm just like, okay, well, yeah, I have my whiteboard right over here. Let me adjust that, update it. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, forgot I wrote this thing. And then you start, it's like this, taking that first step sometimes is just so important.
Yeah, yeah, it's so easy to be like, well, nothing's flowing, so
Yeah.
try again tomorrow. But you have to do something. I mean, we really don't have that rough of a job when it comes to hours,
No.
I mean, we kind of do whatever we want. We're kind of spoiled in the sense that like if things aren't perfect, we cause a bit of a fit, and we have no boss. So it's like if you can, we're asking ourselves to work 1 hour a day.
Yeah.
It's
right.
like, can I please try to get to work 1 hour a day?
Yeah.
And I remember watching I'm sure every comic has said this, but like when I first came to look at apartments, and I saw it before. When I first came to look at apartments in New York, I was flying in with my buddy Ray, and I was watching Jerry Seinfeld's Comedian on the plane.
The Bible.
I'm just like, remember why you're doing this.
Yeah.
And obviously he's such an anomaly when it comes to hard work and success, but of being able to work that hard. But you see the way other comics work. I mean, you know what it's like in LA and in these bigger cities where people are really breaking, really making it. And you see how hard people work, and you're like, I better get myself into gear here, because I thought I was putting in a ton of time, and I'm seeing what they're doing,
Yeah, it's always work-based, and like you're right. Like I think even Seinfeld says that in the documentary or somewhere else, where it's like writing for an hour of actual writing a day is a ton. But like if you're actually writing for an hour, like you can't write 8 hours a day. Maybe you can. Some people, if you're doing more script-based or stuff like that, or you're on a writing staff, but like writing jokes for 8 hours a day, like that would be a lot.
That would be great. You would be insane.
Yeah.
You would lose your mind, because we're such creatures of like, get it to a point and then do it, get it to then do it again.
Yeah.
Like, where if you just wrote for 8 hours, I mean, you would have so many jokes, you wouldn't have the time to do them,
Right. I'm trying to add an additional hour now. I haven't done it yet, but of where I'm like, okay, so I wrote these, like, can I rehearse them at home? Or like walk around the house and like rehearse them, because like that's, instead of trying them like essentially for the first time out loud on stage, and that's been helping.
Yeah, I mean, and especially right now where you start to go, I need to find another way to run stuff.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like I've been fortunate to like be able to write with some other comics like on Zoom. We'll do like a weekly writing thing. It's like,
Oh, that's
and
smart.
it's not a crowd, but it's like, I got this. Is there anything here?
Yeah.
You run a couple bits and they tell you whether it sucks or it's good, and it's, you feel like, well, at least I've done something. You
Yeah.
know.
And once it comes out of your mouth, as it's coming out, you're like, this is good. Or this, like halfway through saying it, you're like, I know this is not good.
Yeah, exactly. You almost want to stop midway. You're like, you know what? I'm not even gonna waste my time, and I'm not gonna waste your time either. Like, I'm just
Right.
gonna cut it off right here. I'll think of something for my next turn.
Exactly.
So,
What's one thing you invested in terms of like your career where you're like, I tried this one avenue, but for me, it just wasn't a good fit?
oh, any social media platform,
How interesting.
where, I mean, I feel like I've tried. I mean, but the thing is that it doesn't end. Like,
Yeah.
it's not. It has eventually has to fit. But like, certainly TikTok. I tried throwing some stuff on TikTok. I almost said on the TikTok,
On the
like I was
yeah.
90.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah, that's probably why I'm actually loading them up to the TikTok instead of
Right.
TikTok. But I've tried that, and it's like, okay, maybe one does all right, but the feeling of just like defeat when your video doesn't do well, oh, it's sickening. It's
Yeah.
like, and it's that old line in stand up where you're like, this worked last night, where you really want to say that. You're like, this worked in real life.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It was good,
Who
I swear.
right. Who thought this was viral was everybody at the show, that the clip that you're watching.
Yeah.
It's like, so that's frustrating. But I don't know. I have, probably to a fault, like I haven't strayed too far into anything like different. I mean, I've certainly went through phases of like different styles, different voicings. I've tried to be dirtier. I tried to be, and that I don't know. That's never worked for me. Like,
Yeah.
I've tried to be more aggressive on stage, or more angrier maybe sometimes, and it's
More
just like,
more dynamic, maybe if you tried.
yeah, more
Yeah.
dynamic. Yeah, and not that I'm like monotone, but like, you're like, oh, maybe I was just talking to a comic about this, where you make the mistake of like, before a show, you listen to Bill Hicks or watch like Bill Burr's like Philadelphia, a famous Philadelphia thing,
Yeah.
and you're like, I'm gonna do that at the show, and then you go and you do it. You're like, oh, the reason why it doesn't work is because I'm not funny. I'm not as funny as those people are, and that takes years to master. You're like, I'm gonna make a point, and then you go to the show and you're like, I think I just screamed at everybody.
Right.
Like,
It's
for
also,
no reason.
yeah, I mean, you got to be authentic to yourself. If like there's a certain, you can be a monotone comic, but also like add 10% more dynamism without going all the way. You can
Yeah.
make improvements around the edges without completely changing who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I first started, I was really soft spoken on stage, really just sort of almost monotone. And someone told me, like, they were like, you have to keep doing that. That's your thing. And it was the worst advice I ever gotten, because that's not how people talk. That's not, like, my goal on stage is to be conversational, to be like you could talk, you would hear these stories the same as you would on a podcast, or if we were at a bar or whatever it is. And sometimes people get loud and sometimes people get angry. So like, for a year or two, I was so hell-bent on being like, no, I have to be the quiet person. I could never write a bit like this, or I could never say a line like this. And then you're just like, what? That's not how I am. I have different levels. Now, I'm not like Brian Regan, where it's like, where he's running across the stage, but you just have to be, like you said, authentic to yourself.
Yeah, I just watched Brian Regan's special, and when those moments come up, I'm like, man, part of me wishes like, man, I wish I could be that loud or that like dynamic, but I also know it's like, it's just not me.
Right.
So don't worry about it.
And it's all relative. Where, like you said, like if you're more deadpan or you're more monotone, or you're more quiet, like 10% increase to you is the same as Brian Regan screaming at Red Rocks.
Yeah,
You know, where it's
exactly.
like, because the audience doesn't, hopefully they're not like seeing Brian Regan and then seeing exactly what you're doing, comparing them to each other. They are just seeing what you're giving them. So it's like an increase at all seems like an increase, a big one.
Yeah. I find the podcast has helped me a lot too, just in terms of because you listen, you probably edit your own episodes, or do you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's like when you listen back to yourself all the time, you're like, oh, okay, it's so obvious where you need to add, be more dynamic, where you need to speed up, where you need to slow down, and that has helped my stand up tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. It also makes you hear your own voice of, like, I mean, you said it, I said it also, but I'm just repeating what you said, but where you hear your own voice and you're like, oh, I thought I was being energetic and I actually wasn't.
Yeah.
So this is how I'm coming off to people, you know?
Yeah, exactly. You can, yeah, you get to replay the moments when you're like, oh my God, that was way too much. And you're like, oh, it's nothing.
Exactly, right. It's the best way to have a gauge of yourself is to listen to yourself. Anybody that like is thinking about getting into stand up, I would love to just tell them, like, all right, that's cool. Record yourself talking for 20 minutes, whatever you think is funny or cool or just interesting, and then try to listen to that. And if you can get through 20 minutes, then maybe you should try this. But listening to your own voice with a critical ear is maybe the worst thing about this job.
Yeah, I mean, like we all know, listening to the sets is like one of the best ways, and like I probably do it half the time, if that.
Oh my God. It is so sad just to hear yourself, like, you're just like, please sound better than you are. You know, like, why are you making these noises? You know?
Yeah, exactly. I know this is a weird year. We're coming into like I guess year two of pandemic, but 2021. What are some of your goals of what you want to achieve?
Um, I, I don't know. I want to continue this. I want to continue the progress that I've tried to make. I'm supposed to do an album this year with
Nice.
Helium Records, and I really want to do that. Hopefully, we can do that with things reopening. So I would like that to go really well. I would like to just. I always try to tell myself. Well, I don't tell myself this enough, but it's one of those pieces of advice you need to take more. Where like last year's me would be impressed with what this year's me is doing.
Yes.
So I always try to keep going for that, of like, whatever happens this year, at the end of it, let me be better off than I was the year before. You know?
Yeah.
So that's the goal, is to not go backwards.
Right. Always. If you're getting better, that's the thing, and that's gonna help.
Yeah. Continue to get better, and just, if I could get like 10% more than I'm getting now, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
You know?
But like 1% a day is like a crazy compound interest. Like a lot of what we're doing is compound interest. It's like you can't just go and become the best version of yourself tomorrow any more than you could lose all the weight you want to lose tomorrow or gain all the weight you want to lose tomorrow. It's like it's a thing that goes over time, and you can be better over time, but you can't. There's only a certain amount you can compress it or accelerate it.
Yeah, and we're so quick to forget that, you know, where it's like, God, why don't I have anything? Why didn't I get that? And it's like, what? You only started trying last week.
Yeah.
Really trying. Like, I remember last year around this time, well, I guess last year we were in the pandemic. So maybe in January, December of last year, like I had just begun the process of like trying to get a tape for a late night set. And the frustration of being like, I can't believe I don't have it yet. I can't believe I can't get this tape. Or I think I have the tape and no one responded, or they said no. And I was fortunate that I have friends that have done it, and they're like, go easy, because this is forever. like, you want this right now because you don't have it. But this is just such a long, drawn out marathon, that never ends. If you're really good at this race never ends. You just keep running and running and running until you die, and that is what we have to look forward to.
That is genius advice, and I don't think there's any other way we can end than ending on that.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll make sure to listen back to that.
Yeah, that was awesome. Collin, I really appreciate you doing the podcast. Tell everyone your socials, where you can be found, and your pod and all that.
Of course, you can see me on Instagram and Twitter at Collin Comedy. And TikTok is the same, and YouTube is just Collin Chamberlin. And the podcast is Hell Gigs. It comes out every Wednesday. It's on the Helium Podcast Network, and there's a lot of fun stuff coming up. So I think it'll be good.
Follow him, subscribe here if you're not already. And thanks again. And hopefully I'll be in New York soon and we can hang.
Yeah, man, for sure.
All right, take care.